I've talked about morality quite a bit in several videos. I consider it to be a very important topic. I consider it to be absolutely fundamental to the Western mystery tradition and to practical philosophy. And I'm not alone in this view. Virtually every ancient mystery school and every modern occult fraternity emphasizes moral development at the very beginning. And I don't claim to represent any particular tradition. I'm only presenting my own view. But I don't claim that anything I have to say is original. I'm only expressing the ancient, esoteric view. There's nothing new about it. As my regular viewers will know, I, like many other Gnostics, consider the wise serpent in the Garden of Eden story to be a liberator, or a kind of Promethean hero. He brought gnosis, or enlightenment, to humankind. Upon eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve's eyes were opened, and they became like God, knowing both good and evil. A few people have asked me to define gnosis. As we can see here, gnosis is the knowledge of good and evil. Gnosis is also the knowledge of one's true self. These are two different ways of saying the same thing. When Adam ate the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he became God. In other words, he became his true self. This is the goal of every mystery religion, and every authentic mystery school begins with moral training. They say, know thyself, and then they offer moral instruction through various symbols and allegories. Some will say that there's more to it than this, and I don't disagree, but I would insist that this is at least the heart of it. And just for the sake of the argument, let's imagine this really is the whole of it. The mere suggestion of this will irritate some of my listeners. Most people become interested in the occult and secret societies because they hope to learn some ancient hidden secret, or to learn to harness some kind of magical power or unleash some kind of psychic abilities. This is the bait on the hook. The fish won't bite if there's no bait on the hook. And a secret is powerful bait. Teachers within the esoteric schools have known this for a long time. So they create elaborate degree structures with mysterious rituals and symbols. They insinuate that they're in possession of some ancient secret, and that they have learned to master hidden powers and can teach you to do the same. But of course, these secrets can't be trusted to just anyone, can they? After all, this knowledge, or these powers, could be dangerous in the wrong hands, right? And so obviously you'll have to go through a long process of preparation and testing. And in this way, the candidate is enticed to persevere in the physical, mental, and spiritual disciplines, which will eventually lead to self-mastery. Again, I'm only asking you to imagine that this is true for the sake of discussion. I'm not denying that such ancient secrets or hidden powers exist. That isn't the point. Let me give you a kind of parable. And it's only a parable, so please don't miss the point by taking it literally. Imagine that a man wants to find a wife. Recognizing that women tend to be attracted to wealth and power, he adopts the dress and manner of a successful, high-status alpha male in order to make himself more attractive to women. I don't mean that he lies to women, but only that he understands what women instinctively find attractive and tries to make himself appear more attractive to women, in the same way that a woman might make herself appear more attractive to men by wearing makeup, perfume, and clothing that accentuates her figure and gives her the appearance of youth and fertility, which men instinctively find attractive. Over a period of time, he succeeds in meeting and going on dates with a few different women, and eventually, he finds one who he really likes and feels a genuine connection with, and she seems to have genuine affections for him too. But a doubt enters into his mind. He wonders if she really loves him for who he is, or if she just sees him as a resource. In the same way that a woman might wonder if a man really loves her or is just interested in using her for sex. He decides there's only one way to know for sure. He tells her that before things get any more serious between them, he wants to make sure he hasn't misled her, and that he doesn't want to pretend to be something he's not. He tells her he doesn't actually make very much money. He really does own a small business, just like he told her when they met. But the business isn't doing very well right now, and he's actually a little worried that he might go out of business and be forced to work some low-wage job, because he really doesn't know what else he will do if his business fails, the way it looks like it might. She tells him it doesn't matter, and that she likes him for who he is, not because of how much money he does or doesn't have. But she starts to act different around him, and a few days later she breaks up with him and tells him she just doesn't feel like they're compatible. After some time passes, he finds another woman, and after they've gone on a few dates, he tells her the same thing. She also tells him it doesn't matter how much money he does or doesn't have, and that she likes him for who he is. But unlike the last woman, her behavior doesn't change. After a few months, they even begin to talk about moving in together or getting married. He decides it's time to tell her that what he told her before was just a test. He didn't lie. His business really wasn't doing well, but it didn't matter, because he had already made enough to retire early from selling his previous business, and only started his current business to stay busy, and because it was something he loved doing. He isn't a millionaire or anything, but he lives a very simple lifestyle, and has enough saved up to continue living a simple but comfortable lifestyle while supporting a family. Now obviously, if someone wanted to, they could find all kinds of things to pick apart in this story, but again, they'd be missing the point. I think it's clear that the man in the story is like the teachers of the mystery tradition. He understands what will cause students to be initially attracted to his teachings, just as the man knows what will cause women to be initially attracted to him, and just as women know what will cause men to be initially attracted to them, or just as fishermen know what kind of bait works best to catch fish. This may sound unethical to some, and I think it could be. I do think it's something of a slippery slope. I recognize that sometimes there's a thin line between right and wrong, but that doesn't mean that it's all relative or that there's no such thing as right and wrong. It's possible to admit that there are shades of gray without denying that there is also black and white. But if you follow the analogy, it isn't hard to see why mystery schools or occult fraternities might find it useful to appear to be in possession of some ancient secret knowledge, or the keys to unlocking some kind of hidden power. And I think you can also see why it might be useful to deny it as well. So whether one claims to be in possession of some secret knowledge or denies it, they might or might not be lying, for reasons that may or may not be noble. And either way, there may be a double bluff involved. And so my advice is to be like the woman who doesn't care about money, as long as she's with the man she loves. I don't necessarily encourage or discourage anyone from joining any particular mystery school, or secret fraternity, or mainstream religion. I only caution people about giving someone else power and authority over them, or about falling for the manipulative game of, I know a secret, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. If you accept that the ultimate secret knowledge is the knowledge of the true self, or the knowledge of good and evil, then it should be apparent that this isn't a knowledge which anyone else can offer you, or claim to have exclusive possession of. But to some, it may not be immediately apparent that the knowledge of good and evil and the knowledge of your true self are essentially identical. I can attempt to explain it in a couple of different ways, and in doing so, I believe I can also demonstrate the truth of objective, absolute morality. Let's consider the maxim, made famous by Crowley, "Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." I want to make it clear that I'm not necessarily promoting Crowley or Thelema. I'm only interested in this phrase, and whether or not my interpretation of this phrase is in alignment with someone else's is of no concern to me. I'm only explaining my own perspective, which I believe to be congruent with ancient gnosis. Many people, when they hear the phrase, "Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," will understand this to mean something like, there's no such thing as right and wrong. Morality is relative or subjective, so just do whatever you want. Do as you will. But this isn't what the saying means. Only a very ignorant man, such as Anton LaVey, the Jewish founder of the Church of Satan, would promote such a perverse doctrine. And of course, the religion of the Church of Satan, is nothing more than a perversion and inversion of the true religion of gnosis, or illumination. And LaVey's Satanism is intended as a parody of Christianity and as a mockery of the teachings of Christ. And to be fair, I should also say that I consider the modern mainstream Christian churches to also be parodies of the true and invisible Christian church, and to be a corruption of the teachings of the Gnostic Christ. It's interesting that in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 22, verse 36, if you want to look up the passage for yourself, a so-called expert in the law from the synagogue of Satan asked Jesus, "Which is the greatest of all the commandments?" Jesus answers him that the greatest of all the commandments is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Then he adds that the second greatest commandment is like the first. The second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. He tells them that the whole of the law hangs on these two commandments. Love God. Love your fellow man as you love yourself. And it's interesting to me that Jesus says that the second is like the first, because in the esoteric view, these two commandments are the same. Every person you encounter is an expression of the divine. Every person's soul contains a divine spark. To love God is to love your neighbor. And to love your neighbor is to love God, because your neighbor is God. So Jesus is telling the truth when he says that the second commandment is like the first. And it's also interesting to me that he says, love your neighbor as yourself, because in truth, your neighbor is yourself. By this, I mean that your true self and your neighbor's true self are the same divine self. And so according to Jesus, the greatest commandment is love. Love is the whole of the law. Love God. In other words, love your true self. And love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love your neighbor as you love your true self. Love your neighbor as you love God, because your neighbor's true self is also God. And so, love. Love is the whole of the law. Love under will. This is the rest of the saying. Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. The entire phrase is interesting to meditate on. And I want to repeat that I'm not giving a lecture on Thelema here. I'm just offering some of my own thoughts on this interesting phrase. Of course, it's fascinating that in Greek gematria, both love, agape, and will, Thelema, are equal to 93. And Crowley was very much aware of this. The significance of this, if you buy into gematria, is that love and will are equivalent. By this, I mean that agape, or divine love, and the true will or divine will are the same. To act in accordance with divine love is to act in accordance with the divine will. In the Gospel of John, Jesus, speaking as his divine, true self, says, "If you love me, keep my commandments." To love God is to act and live in alignment with God's will. And remember that in the esoteric view, God is your true self. To live in alignment with the divine will or divine law is simply to live in alignment with your own true self and to act in accordance with your own true will. Do as you will is the whole of the law. Love is the law. To love your neighbor or your fellow man as yourself is essentially the golden rule, in both its positive and negative formulation. The positive formulation, of course, is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The negative formulation is don't do anything to someone else that you wouldn't want them to do to you. And this is essentially the same as the non-aggression principle. In light of esoteric philosophy, the golden rule can be reformulated as do unto yourself what you want to do unto yourself, and don't do anything to yourself that you wouldn't want to do to yourself. The non-aggression principle boils down to don't initiate the use of violence against yourself. This is just common sense. I've always thought that Kant's categorical imperative was worded poorly. I think it's usually translated as something like, you should always act in such a manner that you could will that your actions should serve as an example from which a universal maxim might, in principle, be extrapolated. I prefer to say it like this: do unto others as you would have others do unto others. In light of esoteric philosophy, this could be reformulated as do unto yourself as you would will yourself to do unto yourself. Notice that all of these principles, when viewed through the lens of esoteric philosophy, can essentially be summed up as do what you want. Of course, I want to repeat that this doesn't mean act on whatever carnal impulse arises. The idea is to act in accordance with your true will. The idea is to do what your true self wants, not to do what your false, egoic self wants. Do the will of God. Whatever God wills is good. And of course, this sounds a lot like the divine command theory of morality, which I've criticized in other videos as a disguised form of moral subjectivism. And I believe that all of my criticisms of divine command theory, as it's usually understood, are perfectly valid. But viewed through the lens of esoteric philosophy, divine command theory is true. The divine will really does turn out to be the absolute standard of objective morality. For morality to be objective, it must be rooted in objective reality. In the esoteric view, all is mind. The only reality is the universal mind and mental experiences and ideas that exist within the universal mind. If morality were rooted merely in experiences which arise within the universal mind, then someone might argue that morality is subjective. But the nature of good and evil are rooted in the very nature of the universal mind itself. The nature of the universal mind is as it is and can't be otherwise. It is what it is. The divine nature and the divine will are objective facts. Moral statements, then, are statements about objective reality. They are statements regarding whether or not an action is in alignment with or out of alignment with the divine will. And so, moral statements are not merely prescriptive, as ignorant modern academic pseudo-philosophers claim, but are descriptive. Moral truths are objective and absolute. Morality is not subjective or relative. I've criticized moral relativism several times in the past, in several different videos, and a few times a viewer has asked me what the absolute standard of objective morality is. Until now, I've primarily offered pragmatic arguments for moral behavior, because, as you can see, my moral philosophy is grounded in my metaphysical philosophy. My moral philosophy logically follows from my metaphysics, and my metaphysics logically follows from my epistemology, which is both rational and empirical. So anyone who rejects moral realism is neither a rationalist or an empiricist. But anyone who accepts either rationalism or empiricism is led inevitably toward immaterialism and moral realism if they are logically consistent, and if they have intellectual honesty and integrity. I think I'll end there for now. If you enjoyed this talk, please hit the like button and share this video on social media. And be sure to subscribe for more content like this in the future. Also, be sure to follow the link in the description box to my Patreon page. In the future, I'll be publishing exclusive content there that won't be available anywhere else. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. Peace.